Hello everyone, welcome to the second part of my guide on playing h3dm1. Today I will teach you guys how to snowball, how to get started on your map, how to play the early game. However, first I want to give a shout out to Rumy for being an awesome person around the community and for helping out with the thumbnails made for the videos. I'll link something where you can look at more of her works if you're interested down in the description. So make sure to have a look if you are interested in amazing artworks. Alright class, let us begin with the second lesson now. First of all, what do I consider the early game? When I talk about early game, I mean the phase in which you're supposed to prepare the, let's call, snowball. Like you scout out these zones you have, you prepare a hero who gets your map started, you collect army, all that stuff. There is never a precise timing, like you can't say early game goes from day 1 to day 6, from day 1 to week 2, whatever. It all is very dependent on the map. Especially among stronger players, it can be very likely that this so-called early game will end somewhere week 1, because the map is very good. Sometimes it will even take into midweek 2, where you still have to prepare and get your things together. A good indicator for your transition into what I call the mid-game would be the army you use. Like early on, you will mostly rely on army that you build and army that you buy out from towns, etc. And at some point, this army just becomes meat. And that is the point which I would consider the mid-game already. Today, however, I want to talk about the things you have to do or you have to get done before you can transition into this snowball, about which we will talk later. Pretty much we talked about the win conditions in the first part of this guide, you maybe remember it. Some of those will come here again. You will need a hero that gets your map started, you will need somewhat that resembles an army, or even better, a good army, and you will need like map presence, you will need to scout out objectives you have. All the aspects mentioned before go together in one big bunch, so you can't neglect one of the things and focus on the others. You have to pretty much do everything at the same time. And the goals themselves are in a way counterproductive to each other, so you have to find a good balance. To make the whole thing a bit more like visible for the basic eye, I'm going to show you guys a save from a game I played a while ago, and we'll try to explain it with the help of that save. So what you see here is a game I played a while ago, h3dm1. It was a Rampart mirror. We played Mafala against Genova. And by the map, what I can say before is we had a lot of range guards on the map, a bunch of not very pleasant 6k guards, and one of the major aspects we had for our army was this Dendroid arc over here, which provides us with a bunch of army. What you're seeing here right now is the situation I was myself in on the 7th day of the first week, where I was pretty much preparing to get started. This is where the point you could call the, let's call it the climax of the end of the early game. This is where I tried to transition out of my army into taking the objectives I scouted out and prepared for. And what happened here is that my hero I was maining early on was this Mafala. She didn't have any magic skills yet, but it's a warrior, she has armorer, so she can get the job done. I set her up on the first object I was to take after getting my week 2 army, then she would slowly transition out over through this way, while my other heroes would chain my army over here and take this conservatory on-site heroes pretty much at this point, which my army was strong enough for. Then the whole thing would go back, I would grab this here, this Consa, on Mefa on the next day, who would be walking south. By that time I would be able to split and transition to what you would call the mid-game. What happened in the long run is that my opponent gave up. More about that in a moment. As you can see, expansion-wise, I had my 3 towns taken, I saw the treasure zones, I didn't open any yet to save my army up. I went with a build where I built Silver Pegasi up to deal with the range units, built up the normal stuff, like until trees, Didn't start the Mage Guild yet. Grabbed the Dendroid Axe mentioned previously, and I think I even had a Giant. Yeah, I had a Giant from a minimal experience shop taken, and this is the army I had left. Like, I had my Grand Elves, I had a handful of Centaurs left, I had some random meat, and the Giant. Within the game, before my opponent decided to GG out, I took this experimental workshop and was in the fight of the consoles, which was going very cleanly as well. What happened on the other side was that my opponent, as you can see here right now, he has more zones than me, so he opened up this additional treasure zone. His Mage Guild progression is stronger than mine. And his hero is arguably better than mine as well. So what happened here? If you have a look at this situation here, he has literally no army left. He bled almost everything on the range box we had, which can be said probably because he didn't go for the Silver Pegasi. So he relied on the armies that he would buy out newly, and then would have to try to play off that, which in his case did not work out. So even though his expansions were stronger, his hero was arguably better than mine, he still ended up not being able to transition into the snowball that he was supposed to. Simply because he did not adjust to the map as he should have. He skipped the Silver Pegasi, which did not allow him to fight the range guards as cleanly as they allowed me to do, which resulted in him bleeding a lot of army, which then again resulted in him not being able to transition into the creature banks. In regards to army, there is pretty much 3 things you have to consider. The first one of those is, what does the map offer? If we were to again look at the map we have over here, the map has a very simple offering army-wise. We play Rampart, we have a Dendroid dwelling, and we have dungeon towns all over the place. So what the map offers pretty clearly is Dendroids. Dendroids are the good units, you can go for them, they make sense. There was also Silver Pegasi dwelling, and if that is everything you have to offer on this map, it's a very clear choice and you can go for that. Sometimes you have situations where the map offers different things, where you have different options. A good example for that would be a situation where 2 of your town zones are, let's say, Cove, and that allows you to go into a double build of birds or into some other kind of double build. Sometimes you will have your native town as one of the side towns as well, which allows some kind of other double build again. Like, this is a thing that is very different from map to map. It will differ from map to map and will require you to make the correct decision, or to make a good decision at least, since there can be several different decisions that all can work out in the end. The next point in that regard would be what the map actually requires. As I said before, this map offered a bunch of Dendroids. However, it also had a bunch of range guards. So the one big difference in the build path my opponent and me took in this game was, he did not build Silver Pegasi. Even though Silver Pegasi are one of the best hard counters to range units there is. They block them turn 1, they're decently tanky, and allow your other units to close in while you don't lose anything. My opponent simply skipped Silver Pegasi, I did not. The result was that he kept bleeding his meat left and right on all the range guards we had, while I did not. To make it a bit clearer, we can look at the whole thing again. I did this fight without losses, this one went without losses, no losses here, no losses on those, and no losses here, simply because of the decision to build one unit. And there it also comes into play that what the map requires and what the map offers, however, also goes hand in hand with the gold and resource situation. So, like, obviously I would love to build unicorns, war unicorns, a castle, Wyvern monarchs, plus behemoths, and split everything up. The thing is, building up a lot of stuff doesn't actually mean I can still afford anything in the end. A good advice I would give on that is, around, let's say, day 5 or day 6, you should try to get a rough estimation on your gold situation to figure out, okay, I have this much gold, I can get this much gold added to that until 1-to-1. And by 1-to-1, you usually want all your army bought out unless the map turns out to be very slow. Actually thinking about how rich the map is and adjusting your build order to that will often help you to prevent unpleasant situations in which you cannot afford your army even though you build it. And you will usually have to adjust the build order you go with according to the amount of gold you have on the map. As mentioned before, one of the things really important is an early game hero. Don't mix up the early game hero with your potential main or the late control heroes. The important thing about this early game hero is he has to start your map for you. For that, let's look at Astral as an example, right? So you have an Astral and you start leveling him. And suddenly he ends up like this. You already invested a bunch of experience into him, you're about to check out his next level, and he doesn't get Earth Magic again. Into this slot he gets, I don't know, Eagle Eye or Mysticism. And he loses all his potential as a late game hero. He can't town teleport around, he can't really do important fights like Utopias on Resurrects or anything. He's just stuck in this stage and you already invest XP into him. Well, just delete him, right? No, wrong. He doesn't have the optimal skill set, but he still has a skill set that will fit into some potential scenarios. For that it is important to understand which skills interact how with which kind of creature bank. Like every creature bank has its own, let's call it, weaknesses and strengths, which you kind of have to abuse if you want to use it the most efficient way. So as an example, let's look at our Astral. How would his skill set work in which kind of object? We have 4 kinds of creature banks to begin with. We have Griffin Conservatories, which give angels for fighting griffins. We have Experimental Workshops, where we fight steel golems to get giants. We have Dragonfly Hives, where we fight dragonflies for wyverns. And we have Pickets, where we fight wolf raiders to get cyclops. So for this first example, we look at the Griffin Conservatory. What can we notice about the units we have to fight? We fight griffins. They have a very large damage span and the minimal damage is pretty low. They are decently fast, but not insanely fast, and they are somewhat tanky. They can have an upgraded stack, which will make it a bit uglier. So considering all of that, this Astral we just saw, what things can he do to make this fight easier for us? If you consider only the spells of the lower tiers, we have Curse and Haste as most notable spells here. Curse in the Griffin Conservatory is an insanely powerful spell if you do have fire magic. Since you reduce the average damage of a unit from 4 to 5 to 2, Mass Curse reduces the damage to minimal damage -1, which in this case is a set 2. So we reduce it by over 50%. So as long as you have mana and turns to keep the Mass Curse up, it becomes stronger than, let's say, Mass Shield combined with Expert Armorer, because you reduce the damage of Griffins by over 50%. So as an example, if we just take the first hits here from the Royal Griffin, hit our Master Gremlin for 30 Gremlins. If we were to do the same with Curse, he hits him for 12, making the whole fight a lot easier. Generally speaking, pretty much all kinds of tools can work out pretty well in Griffin Conservatories. If you have Water, Mass Bless can help you deal a lot of damage, killing the Griffins faster. If you have Mass Slow, you can slow them down, kite them, and kill them. If you have Mass Haste, the fight becomes easier to handle as well, because you can easily block in your range units in a corner, defend them, and hit. And Mass Curse is arguably one of the most powerful tools you have here. Steel Golems, compared to Griffins, have a by far smaller damage span, and their minimal damage is a lot higher. So if we were to go in here with Mass Curse, their damage would go from an average of 7 to 5, so the reduction is not even comparable. Therefore, for example, going into an experimental workshop with the same approach you would go into the Consa would not work out. The golems are resistant to spells, the curse hits them far less. They have their weaknesses, that they are smaller, easier to kite, and they don't morale compared to griffins. But if your approach is to, as said in the Consa before, curse, go into a corner and tank, it will not work out remotely as well as out here. One important thing about pickets and hives is that the guards in front of them are a lot harder due to their higher AI value. So killing a picket guard or a hive guard can at times be harder than killing the actual picket or hive. That goes especially for hives, unless you roll a very easy or kiteable guard. But as you see here, we have Thunderbirds guarding the picket, we have a bunch of Stormbirds guarding the hive. That's not comparable with the easy guards that a Consor or a XP shop have. So checking those objects out for their sizes early on is not often a thing. Like, you usually only do the guards if they are very easy. Let's say you have mummies or leprechauns. Or if you are very certain you take on any size. So for the fight on the picket and on the inside, it can be set to fight wolf raiders who have a high damage span. Mass Curse is pretty good here. It's not amazing, it's pretty good. However, especially spells like Mass Slow and Mass Haste really dominate the wolves. They are very squishy, they die fast, but their main danger is that they themselves are very, very painful. Like, they go in, start killing your stuff while they go first, and you lose a lot of army. So the best way to deal with pickets is having first speed and then either Mass Haste or Mass Slow. So as an example, let's just quick combat to the fight. We lose 50 gremlins even though it's a mini. If we were to, let's say, cast Mass Haste and queue the fight, we lose nothing. Same would go for larger size as well. Like, the pickets themselves tend to be an object that's either very hard and, well, not hard, but rather very painful. You will lose a lot of meat, you will lose a lot of stuff, or they are almost free. In general, as a rule of thumb, it can be said that Mass Haste, Mass Slow, and pickets are amazing. Mass Curse is decent. Pure brawling power is underwhelming, usually, unless you really have the speed advantage on several stacks already. And having water magic is insanely underwhelming. Like, it does almost nothing, to be honest. And well, in hives you fight those nasty snakes with a very large damage span, very low minimal damage, and insanely high speed. And they have the ability to dispel on their attacks. So in general, it can be said that in hives you're probably best off just having brute force, expert offense, expert armor, stuff like that. Mass Curse is very handy after tanking the first turn, because their damage gets reduced to 1. Haste and Slow tend to very rarely work. Like, if you have first speed due to, let's say, Freed Sultans or some kind of speed artifact or whatnot, Mass Slow can work, will help, but will not do you wonders because they are still fast even under Mass Slow. Buffing up against Dragonflies is not that helpful. Like, you can get off one good hit with Mass Bless, or you can tank one hit a bit better with Shield, but as I said, they dispel, so maybe you are better off casting something else. Okay, let's sum it up once more. In hives, you want to rely either on brute force, offense, armora, or on debuffing the snakes, preferably with Mass Curse. Buffing yourself with water magic, haste, or shield, stone skin will do nothing because they dispel. Well, not nothing, but barely anything. In pickets, you mostly want to rely on speed, right? So slow or haste will do the best job because wolves are very squishy, so you kill them fast. Curse and Armora can help quite a bit, or if you have very fast stacks, offense can be a decider as well, but mostly haste and slow are the biggest things that influence it. In experimental workshops, you don't want to rely on damaging spells. There, your best way to play it is mostly to slow, buff up with shield, stone skin, and maybe brute force it with offense, armor, archery, stuff like that. Curse doesn't do much, Bless is questionable, and air magic gives nothing besides haste, so lightning bolts and magic arrows don't do much. In conservatories you can rely on pretty much anything. You can mass curse them, you can slow them, you can buff up, you can brute force, you can haste and run around while throwing lightning bolts. Pretty much everything works in consoles. But if you have water magic, Bless will help in some of the objects. It's not too great though. In consoles and XP shops it's decent, in the others it's pretty bad. If we want to combine both aspects I just talked about, the army aspect and the hero aspect, it's very important to actually think about what hero takes which fights. I generated a starting zone for that. We will see that the amount of experience we actually have on the map is very limited. We do not have a huge amount of experience around. We have some rogues, some wolves. The breaks themselves over here give decent XP, here they don't. And it's about deciding which heroes you early on want to use and invest into them. A mistake many players do is either to over-rely on one single hero, or they overspread their experience. So both is wrong, having only one hero do fights, and having all your heroes do fights. Also, you have to think about which fights give what amount of experience before you take them on. For example, doing an objective like this Black Tower here will give you in between 180 and 300 experience. If it's a small Black Tower, anyone can do it, and it won't mostly even matter to whom you give the experience because it's a very low amount. Stuff like, let's say, those golems here are something you should give to a hero whom you want to experience up because they will give a lot. We are counting around 1000 XP here. So considering that you will have objectives that give gold, as Black Towers and Crypts, which don't yield a lot of experience, and you have objectives, let's say churchyards and dwarven treasuries, which do give a lot of experience. Thinking about that will be important for the development of your heroes. Also, you will have to consider what heroes you want to use for which fight. On this map here, we have very easy 6k guards mostly, so it will not be too important. If we had, let's say, a range guard as one of those, and we had a tactics hero, it would be maybe a thing to use this tactics hero for those breaks. Mostly with the reasoning to save army, to keep the army we have early on alive. And while we'll expand, we'll have to try and keep our army as alive as well as possible. Entering zones is great, taking the towns is great because it allows us to scout out what these zones have and to set up better chains because we can position our heroes inside the zones already. It also helps us with making our plans because we will know what objects are available to us. However, it is important that when we enter the zones, we do not simply go ahead and do nothing in the zone, capture the town and get out, and then continue expanding. Because the farther we expand and the more zones we own, the longer our chains get. And having chains that are too long will result in us not actually doing anything, because our heroes will be busy with running along the road, delivering the army from A to B and not doing stuff. So let's say we owned this town over here and this town all the way over here, and we tried to play in both of those towns. The result would be that you would be busy with sending 5 or 6 heroes just for the sake of delivering the army. A better way to play would be to go into a zone, farm it out a bit, go into the next zone, farm that zone out a bit, go into the next zone, farm that out a bit, and then play within a close proximity within the zones, whilst preparing, scouting out objects, and setting up for the later stages of the game. A common mistake done early on is not valuing the non-native meat enough. What do I mean by that? So let's imagine we have the starting army, we buy out those troops here, we buy out the crewmates, we buy out the pirates, and we get our second tier of army out. Those here are the troops we have, right? What some players tend to do is go into a fight and blindly throw away the dwarves, the elves, and the centaurs. The problem with that is, once we start running out of the 1 stacks or the meat we have in those stacks here, we actually have to use our native army, which means it shrinks. The cleaner way is to try and slowly but carefully use up this non-native meat until we get more of it. For example, using it up in some of the fights around here as 1 stacks, maybe as bigger meat stack for something like the lizard man over here if we had to kill them. And then by the time we reach the second town, it's okay to have lost the rampart meat, because we can then replace it with the stronghold meat. Then we could use the stronghold meat to transition to the next zone and maybe bleed it along the way here and do some fights, like lose it on marksman, lose it on something else. Then we could use this non-native meat to get into the next zone and so on. That way we would keep our main army, the Cove stuff, alive. The problem with that is, once we start running out of the 1 stacks or the meat we have in those stacks here, we actually have to use our native army, which means it shrinks. The cleaner way is to try and slowly but carefully use up this non-native meat until we get more of it. For example, using it up in some of the fights around here as 1 stacks, maybe as bigger meat stack for something like the lizard man over here if we had to kill them. And then by the time we reach the second town, it's okay to have lost the rampart meat, because we can then replace it with the stronghold meat. Then we could use the stronghold meat to transition to the next zone and maybe bleed along the way here and do some fights, like lose it on marksman, lose it on something else. Then we could use this non-native meat to get into the next zone and so on. That way we would keep our main army, the Cove stuff, alive. The last thing I want to talk about is how we can actually accelerate our game pace. Like, after all, it's a mirror. Our opponent will have the same options as we do, right? However, it's never possible to use all the options, and there's 2 things that can really help speed up your game. First thing is to get artifacts. To get artifacts, there's 2 ways. We can get a bunch of good stats from minor artifacts, which will be in churchyards, black towers, and so on. The other thing is, we sometimes will have major artifacts which will have a value of 10k, so usually they are very hard. But there's a chance that you have very easy guards, let's say leprechauns or nagas guarding them. We can get a big advantage out of those if we manage to take them. The tempo gained by artifacts is actually very big, if you think about it. Taking on a black tower early on, let's say if it was here and we chained out, could give us boots for 400 movement points. It could give us a greater null flay for 4 attack on every hero, and so on. The advantages we gain are very big. The other way to accelerate our gameplay is actually something many people don't think about. It's quests. We see all those quest huts around, and very many people don't even use that. So let's have a talk about quests here. So the most important thing to know about quests is that the artifact the Seer's Hut seeks is always 2 zones away from you. That means quest huts that are in our starting zone will always have the artifact in a treasure zone. If we end up having a quest hut in a treasure zone, so let's say in this one, it's either in our starting zone or it's in the treasure zone of the same town. That means a quest hut in this zone over here in the wastelands would look for a quest that is either in our starting zone or in the other zone connected to this fortress town, being the zone over here. That can give a big advantage because quests work in a way like comparable to Pandora boxes. You will have a guard for the quest item, and depending on the guard, you will receive a reward. However, the guard compared to the reward is a lot weaker than with Pandora's box. So you can have very insane rewards for pretty easy guards. I remember having tournament games where I pulled 15 Archmagi week 1 from a quest guarded by 15 I think 20 iron golems, 25 iron golems, something like that. How you would use that for quests in your starting zone is, for example, if you had a lookout tower like this one, and you would see a quest that you know you have the CSAT for at the site, you could go in, take it, and deliver it back. The more common way to play quests, though, using the knowledge I just gave you, is quests in these town zones. Since the zone always has to be, since the item has always to be 2 zones away from the quest hut, we know that the town zone quest hut will always have the quest item in another town zone. So for example, we have those centaur captains here guarding this here. We take them on. It turns out to be 46 centaur captains. Since we picked it up in a stronghold zone, we can always know that if it turns out to be army, it's going to be stronghold army. We have 2 stronghold towns in this map. We have a potential quest hut over here. So let's say we were to take the quest behind the centaur captains and deliver it out into the other stronghold zone. Oh, I'm lucky. It turns out to be this one. And you receive 35 Wolf Raiders for killing 40 center captains. Just an example. Quests, if they are alone without any shared value, will have very strong rewards for the guard. Using those 35 Wolf Raiders and the Stronghold Town we already took, we can have a big tempo spike because we will have, if we build them up, 40, 50 Wolf Raiders. And many quests on this template behind easy guards in these town zones tend to be unupgraded or upgrade tier 2 units. A lot of those are very strong. We can get like 60 archers, upgrade them to marksmen. We can get 60 lizardmen, upgrade them to lizard warriors. We could get 50 dwarves and have this huge tanky stack of 60 battle dwarves. Stuff like that. So, let's sum it all up. Keep your army alive as good as you can. Don't blindly spend your army into guards you don't have to kill. Use monsters on the map as actual investment. You invest army and movement points to get experience on the stuff they guard. You want to spend the XP wisely. The amount of experience you can get from fights is limited. Think about what fights you take with whom. When you expand, don't overexpand. Instead of just grabbing towns, do stuff within the zones. Otherwise your chains get too long. Think about when you farm what. And don't ignore quests or artifacts. They can be very good advantages for you to get started. If your hero early on turns out to not be perfect, not get earth magic, don't simply abandon him. Rather think about how he can at least help you to start the map. You can switch into another hero later on after you have more army. And think about the resources and gold you have available when you think about your build. Try to sometimes think out of the box if you actually have things that the map requires of you for the kind of guards you have to beat. And with that, I shall be closing today's lesson. I will be seeing you guys next time when we talk about how to actually play the mid-game, the probably most common part where the game gets decided, and arguably the most difficult and most interesting one as well.